I would also like to mention that all presentations will be uploaded in the event page at our website, www.amcham.gr, after the event, so the audience may see them. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dimitris Karavasilis to move on with our next session about global value chains and the supply chain disruption. Dimitri, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, Dina.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dina. So I would like to introduce you Miss Daria Taglioni in order to enter. Hi, Daria. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Daria is the manager of Trade and International Integration Research in World Bank Group, and she joined World Bank on 2011, and she's a senior trade economist in the International Trade Department, and of course she has involved in many projects as a principal economist in the International Finance Corporation. And of course, she's an expert in global value chains and in supply chains. So I hope that we are going to have Daria in order to get insights for the supply chains and for value chains that it's so let's say sensitive nowadays. Daria, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So what I would like first to address you is that everybody knows that, I mean, we live on it, and we live in a world of increasing shocks nowadays. And what do you believe that companies and small companies or really small companies or organizations should do in order to adapt and to survive in these increasing shocks we have?
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, the standard the trade economists would give you is that diversification is the only way to deal with shocks, because you never know where shocks will come from. So we hear a lot of thesis that reshoring it's the way to go. I mean, but that actually it doesn't prevent exposing you to more domestic or local shocks. Of course, small firms can't really diversify as easily as large firms, but what they can do is actually to try to participate in sectors that allow them to become modular, and so basically so that the activity that they do can be adapted to many different activities. So I think modularity would be the key for small firms, and the bigger firms also to have a strategy of market and product diversification.
And Daria, what do you believe about the COVID-19 and concerning the value chain? That is really important. And when we are talking about value chain, in order to determine it, we are talking about how a product from a producer or maybe from nature will come to the end consumer, and the whole value that comes from all this chain, in order to introduce and to be necessity in a kind of covering the demand that the audience that we choose have. So what about COVID-19? Do you believe that all these have changed rapidly? Because right now we have only the old trends, the bibliography that was written before COVID, and now we are rewriting the whole value chain from the beginning. We have a blank page and we start rewriting whatever we observe right now.
Well, I tend to disagree, actually. I think that actually the value chains are behaving well, and a lot of the troubles we are seeing are due to excess demand. So we are demanding in a more synchronized way the same products around the world. And a lot of the tensions and shortages, we saw them precisely on those products, right? It started with the face masks and the ventilators and medical goods, where actually there was a concentrated demand at the same time we had never seen before. And actually, we saw that the solutions came from the more developed value chains. And we are seeing it more recently with the bottlenecks on a lot of critical materials and the supply chains for a lot of materials that are needed from industries that are high in demand now. But I think one important aspect, I think what COVID did was that accelerated a lot of pre-existing trends. And so clearly digitalization. And so basically COVID has really corresponded to a moment where investors, firms, and consumers have spent time building up both their digital equipment, but also their knowledge on how to use this. And so that type of investment will be here to stay. And clearly we made the jump of probably would have taken a few years to get where we got with 1 year in terms of digitalization. And so what we saw is that companies that had invested previously on developing their digital tools thrived, and companies that didn't suffered more. What the digitalization brings normally and did bring in an accelerated way during COVID is a lot of market consolidation. Basically, the bigger firm, it's a winner takes all type of industry normally, the ones that really run on digital. And so what we saw in a lot of markets is that this acceleration of the market consolidation. And so in the, I find fascinating, for instance, to look at the fresh fruit and vegetables. I mean, we saw from the previous speaker those encouraging numbers, but the piece of story that was missing there was that actually the market shares reallocations within those numbers. And so what happened there is really that the two edges of the value chains profited. The big producers that had invested in digitalization, in setting up sales networks, but also that had invested in buying land around the world, so diversifying again source of their products, or in biotechnologies, so in advanced technology beyond digital, right? And then the big supermarket chains that had an e-commerce channel. In between, everything got squeezed. And what we are seeing is the disappearance of the middlemen in many of these industries. And so I do think that this is really the notion that we should pay attention to, and is particularly relevant for SMEs. I don't think we have answers on how to deal with this market concentration. We are seeing, some movement around international taxation that is also meant to address some of these distortions, but I think clearly this is an agenda for the next years to really look more closely into.
Daria, I want to mention in what you are just state that even though we see that pricing is not, let's say, getting lower or being more let's say, be better for the end user, even if the middlemen have been squeezed. So do you believe that in two edges, we mean about producers and to the distribution channels, all these are growing their profits? Or do you believe that there is a bigger cost in the whole chain concerning the e-commerce, because right now there are a lot of the orders are smaller and the products being more customized to every market? Do you believe that this is the reason, or something else is happening, on your opinion?
Yeah, I think actually both the things you are saying are happening. So certainly we saw the large supermarket chains like Tesco or Walmart in the US. I think in 2019 they were even doing profit losses, and if you look at the profits for 2020 and now 2021, there had been spectacular profits. So that's certainly happening. The notion that prices of, let's say, per the unit of production are going up, I think it's there as well, but it could be transitory. So it's true that the orders per single markets are smaller, and so that seems that would bring up the costs. But once companies will have adjusted to the fact that their demand, it's global, no, because an e-commerce channel leads to more global demand, then I do believe that they will be able, in part, to bring down this cost, because basically they will be able to mass customize, meaning right now they sort of offer less variety per market by trying to hit the average consumer in smaller markets. But what e-commerce allows to do is actually to offer a wider range of varieties on the global market by pulling together demands that are now too small for less than for the more let's say less than average products. And so the point is really long convoluted way to say that if this demand from the e-commerce channel is there to stay, after a period in which companies will have figured out how to restructure their supply chain, they should go back to making profits. I think the particular point there to keep in mind is that the e-commerce has a very different geography from the brick and mortar store. So the kind of producers and even the nationality of those producers that participate to the e-commerce chain are very different from the ones that participate to the brick and mortar. And so we need to look at that exactly and how that shapes up.
So what should we expect from the future regarding your researches? And because we have already presented in the beginning of our presentation as GK our findings concerning all this disruption it's coming up, and I know that it's really hard in order to get and to predict or forecast, as we call the future. But in a way, we see that there is a so big disruption right now. And in your opinion, what should we have to expect in the future?
So I think that normally what we saw in recent decades that happens when there are shocks and companies need to cut costs, we are seeing that they digitalize more and dematerialize more. So I think that trend will be there to stay. So I think a lot of opportunities for product as a service. So basically, and I think also in Europe in particular, the regulatory the new regulations will push, yes, towards decarbonization, but also towards more circular economy. Circular economy is not about managing waste and recycling. That's actually an afterthought. It's really about redesigning products, right? So we want products with a longer lifespan. And so what companies need to do is to change the way they make money out of those products. There will be less scope and there will be less incentives, even financial incentives, to make money from selling products, and there will be much more money from using the products as an outlet to lock in consumers and then selling services over them, and checking the entire lifespan and life cycle of the product, even after the consumer has bought it. And so I think that that's clearly an area of growth that will only become more important. So that's the one direction where I would bet things are going: more dematerialization, especially in Europe, and more digitalization. And in terms of the other areas, I think the big question market is the unit cost. I mean, we are seeing now that all these shocks, so the other certainty is that we will have a world with many more shocks, because we have challenges from all fronts, right? And so that is bringing localized price increases that right now they're even transforming in inflation. What does it mean for the cost profile of companies? That's really the big question mark. And I think the uncertainty over those profit margin and the increasing level of the profit of the costs will determine also what happens on many of the areas which are talked about now, like reshoring, reshaping of the value chain, going national. I think for me still remains a big question mark, because we don't know how these underlying factors will push, in what direction they will push.
And in final, I would like to conclude with this assumption concerning our conversation, and I think your input is very, very important for us and for the audience that we have today. So in order to sum up, we see that the mobility is the key word, and flexibility of companies. The second is that they need to focus and to monitor the changes and the data in order to improve their services and their products. And the value chain, it will change as we saw the middlemen have squeezed a lot. And in the future, all this will be replaced by the digitalization and, of course, by the e-commerce. So people will connect by each other the demand and the supply. So the middleman not needed. So will be more simple, let's say, the distribution and the value chain. And finally, if I understood well, you have appointed, and this is something that's very, very important for me, that we need to redesign the products itself in order to give to the final customers not to buy their future waste, but to buy exactly what they need. And the companies would be responsible in order to manage their waste if they are overconsume things, if I understood well.
Yeah, that's wishful thinking, right? I mean, we hope so. And but that's absolutely key. I think the only caveat addition is that is redesign the products and the processes, and of course also the value chain, because as we said, the players will be that different. So like when we talk about products, in fact what we're always talking about is the product, the process through which we do those products, and the value chain. And some of the most successful firms like Amazon, what they're really good at is that designing their value chain perfectly, right? So I think innovation shouldn't be only seen as around the product. And the last point was really, which is functional to that, is also for small firms to be modular in the products that they produce, so that they're multi-purpose, modular in the processes they can plug in, so that they are not captive of some large firm, and so exposed to shocks that might come from that channel or from large buyers. And modular in the value chain, meaning being able basically to be agile, not to move when the time comes. Yeah.
So you believe that Greek companies they have greater opportunities in this new environment, or they have to try harder and more than it was before? Because right now everything is being repositioned. Every country is repositioning itself in the new situation. So do you believe that there are more opportunities for Greek companies?
I think there are more opportunities and more challenges for everybody, or different opportunities. I think static companies that sort of bet on rents will, or risk. I mean, it's a risky strategy to bet on an economy of rents. And companies that bet on innovation and that are agile, they might be able to capture the new opportunities. For Greek companies, I think, I mean, being a landscape of largely smaller firms, I think they have to bet on the type of innovation that works well for smaller firms, which is totally different from the one that works well for large firms. I mean, we said Amazon. I mean, Amazon can diversify and build rockets. Clearly a smaller company is not going to do that type of diversification, but it can explore much more into smaller areas and complementary functions to these large companies. And I think the Greek companies that will be doing that, they will be able to do it greatly. And frankly, having gone through 10 years of crisis, I think has made them stronger. They're ready. I mean, they won't be scared by this. They have already
definitely not, because
the vaccine to the crisis virus. So
we are coming out of our inner world and inner war we had all these years, so we are prepared and ready in order to fight.
The tools, absolutely.
So, thank you very, very much for sharing your value, and your really expertise. Thank you very, very much, and I hope that we are going to have the opportunity in order to release together some papers, and in order to introduce to all this knowledge in the Greek firms. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Daria, for sharing us. Thank you.